The phone in Elena Voss's hand was shaking so hard she could barely hold it to her ear. She had stepped into the narrow hallway outside the private office, thinking no one would see her, thinking no one would hear her voice crack as she begged a stranger on the other end of the line to give her more time. "Please," she whispered, pressing her back against the cold marble wall. "Please, just 2 more weeks. I will find the money. I promise you, I will find it." The voice on the phone, a man named Gareth Doyle from the billing office of Fairview Medical Center, did not sound like he cared about promises. "Miss Voss, we have already extended this account twice. If the balance is not paid by Friday, your brother will be moved out of the treatment program. I am sorry, but rules are rules." Elena closed her eyes. Her brother Milo was only 16 years old. He had been fighting a blood disorder for almost a year, and every week felt like a race against a clock that never slowed down. She pressed her hand to her mouth to stop herself from sobbing out loud, but a small sound still escaped, a broken little gasp that echoed down the quiet hallway. She did not know that the office door behind her, the heavy wooden door with the brass handle, was not fully closed. She did not know that the man inside, a man the whole city feared and rarely dared to look in the eye, was sitting perfectly still at his desk, listening to every word. Dante Moretti was not a man known for patience. He ran one of the most powerful organizations in the city, and men 3 times his age lowered their voices when they spoke his name. His household staff had learned long ago that the safest thing to do was to stay silent, finish their work quickly, and never, under any circumstances, draw his attention. Elena had followed that rule since her first day 2 months ago. She kept her eyes down. She spoke only when spoken to. She scrubbed floors that were already clean and dusted shelves that had no dust, simply because staying busy meant staying invisible, and invisible meant safe. But tonight, exhaustion had worn through her careful walls. She had worked a full day, cleaning 3 floors of the enormous estate, and the moment her shift ended, the phone call came. She thought the west hallway was empty at this hour. She thought she was alone. She was wrong. Inside the office, Dante set down the pen he had been holding. His eyes lifted from the papers on his desk to the sliver of hallway visible through the gap in the door. He could see nothing but a slice of golden lamplight and a shadow moving against the wall, but the voice was clear enough. A young woman, pleading. A hospital bill, a sick brother, tears she was trying and failing to hide. He did not move. He did not call out. He simply listened, the way he listened to everything, cataloging details the way he had trained himself to do since he was a boy of 12. The hospital's name, the administrator's name, the exact amount of money still owed, the date of the deadline. He absorbed every piece of it, filing it away in the sharp, precise part of his mind that never forgot anything important. Elena finished the call a moment later, her voice trembling as she thanked Gareth Doyle for nothing at all, because he had given her nothing. She slid the phone into her apron pocket and wiped her face quickly with the back of her hand, drawing in a shaky breath to steady herself before she had to walk back through the house and pretend everything was fine. That was when she noticed the door. It was open, not wide, but open enough. Her stomach dropped. She had been standing directly outside Mr. Moretti's office this entire time, crying, saying things she never would have said if she had known he could hear. She felt her face go hot with panic. In this house, where every staff member walked on careful, silent feet, being overheard by the master of the house felt like the end of something. She did not know what he might do. Fire her, most likely. Perhaps worse. She had heard whispers among the other staff about what happened to people who displeased him, though she had never seen anything herself. She only knew the fear in their voices when they spoke of him, low and quick, like they did not want the walls themselves to repeat their words. She backed away from the door as quietly as she could, her heart hammering, and hurried down the hallway toward the servants' staircase. She did not look back. She did not see Dante rise from his chair and walk slowly to the door, resting his hand against the frame, staring down the empty corridor where she had just been standing. He said nothing that night. He gave no order, made no comment to his staff, showed no sign that anything unusual had happened. But something inside him, something that had been locked away and forgotten for a very long time, had shifted. Elena did not sleep well that night. She lay awake in her small room on the 3rd floor of the staff quarters, staring at the ceiling, running through every terrible outcome her mind could invent. She imagined being called into his office in the morning, imagined the cold, flat look he was famous for, imagined being told to pack her things and leave before the sun was fully up. She thought of Milo, lying in his hospital bed, unaware that his sister's job, the only thing standing between him and being sent home without treatment, might already be gone. She had come to this city 8 months ago from a small town 2 hours north, following her aunt's advice that there was better work and better pay in the city, work that could help pay for Milo's treatment. Their parents had passed away when Elena was 19, in a car accident that left her the sole guardian of her younger brother. She had taken whatever jobs she could find since then, waitressing, cleaning offices, anything that paid steadily, but nothing paid enough. When she heard through a distant cousin that the Moretti estate was looking for household staff, paying nearly triple what she earned waitressing, she had swallowed her fear of the family's reputation and applied anyway. Milo's treatment did not care about reputations. It only cared about money, and she needed as much of it as she could get. The head housekeeper, a stern but fair woman named Margaret Doyle, no relation to the hospital administrator, had trained Elena in her first weeks. Margaret had been blunt about the rules of the house. Do your work well. Do not speak unless spoken to. Never, under any circumstance, disturb Mr. Moretti when he is in his office, and never let him see you upset, angry, or anything other than calm. He does not like surprises, Margaret had told her on the first day, her voice low. And he does not like weakness. Keep your troubles at home, Elena. This house has no room for them. Elena had followed that advice carefully for 2 months. She kept her grief for her parents locked away. She kept her worry for Milo locked away. She kept everything locked away, every single day, behind a calm face and quick, quiet hands. Until tonight, when the weight of it all had finally cracked through, right outside the one door in the house she should have avoided at all costs. Morning came too soon. Elena dressed in her uniform, a plain gray dress with a white apron, and made her way down to the kitchen, where the other staff were already gathering for the day's assignments. She kept her eyes on the floor, waiting for Margaret to call her name and tell her that Mr. Moretti wished to see her, that her time in this house was finished. But no such call came. Margaret handed out the day's duties as she always did, and Elena's name was listed among the others, assigned to the library and the East Wing, exactly as it had been the day before. She let out a slow breath of relief, though the knot in her stomach did not fully loosen. Perhaps he had not truly heard everything. Perhaps he simply did not care enough to act on it. Either way, she promised herself she would be more careful. She would never let herself be caught so unguarded again. She spent the morning dusting the library shelves, her mind drifting more than once to the memory of Milo's small, tired smile the last time she had visited him in the hospital. He always tried to look strong for her, even when the machines beeping beside his bed told a different story. She thought about the bill, about Friday's deadline, about the 2 weeks she had begged for and not received. She would need to find another way, perhaps a second job on her days off, though she barely had energy left after her long shifts here. Perhaps she could ask her aunt for a loan, though she knew her aunt had little to spare herself. She did not know that, in his office down the hall, Dante Moretti had already begun making calls. He had summoned his financial advisor, a sharp, quiet man named Nico Bellamy, first thing that morning, before the household staff had even begun their rounds. Nico had worked alongside Dante for nearly 10 years, and had learned never to question an order, no matter how unusual it seemed. "I want everything on a hospital called Fairview Medical Center," Dante said, not looking up from the folder in front of him. "Specifically, their billing department. And I want to know everything about an administrator named Gareth Doyle." Nico raised an eyebrow but said nothing beyond, "I will have it for you by this afternoon." By early afternoon, Nico returned with a folder of his own, considerably thinner than Dante would have liked, but enough to begin. What it revealed was troubling in a way that struck a nerve Dante did not often allow to be struck. Fairview Medical Center's billing department, under Gareth Doyle's direct management, had a pattern of inflating charges for patients who came from lower-income backgrounds, families least likely to question the numbers or hire a lawyer to fight back. Doyle had built a small, quiet scheme over the past several years, padding invoices, adding fees that did not exist, threatening families with early discharge or denial of further treatment unless balances, often significantly larger than they should have been, were paid in full. Dante read through the details twice, his expression unreadable, though the muscles in his jaw tightened with each page. He was a man who had built his entire life around control, around never allowing his temper to dictate his actions the way it had when he was young and reckless. He had learned, through hard lessons, that a calm mind made better decisions than an angry one. But something about this particular folder, something about the image of a young woman crying quietly in his hallway, because a corrupt administrator was squeezing money out of her dying brother's treatment, undid years of that careful discipline in a matter of minutes. "Get him on the phone," Dante said quietly. "Now." Nico did not ask who him was. He already knew. Within the hour, Gareth Doyle's office phone rang, and when he answered, the voice on the other end was calm, low, and utterly without warmth. Dante did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He explained, in simple and exact terms, that he was aware of the billing practices at Fairview Medical Center, aware of specific patients who had been overcharged, and aware of one patient in particular, a young man named Milo Voss, whose sister worked in his household. He explained that he expected every fraudulent charge on that account to be reversed by the end of the business day, and he expected a full and thorough review of every other account Doyle had personally overseen in the past 3 years. Gareth Doyle, to his credit, tried at first to bluster his way through, insisting there was some misunderstanding, that hospital billing was complicated, that perhaps Mr. Moretti had been given incorrect information. Dante let him speak for exactly 10 seconds before cutting him off with a single sentence, delivered so quietly that Doyle had to press the phone harder against his ear to hear it. Whatever that sentence was, it was enough. By the end of the call, Doyle's voice had lost all of its confidence, and he was assuring Dante, in a shaking tone, that everything would be corrected immediately, that there would be no further issues, that he understood completely. When the call ended, Dante sat in silence for a long moment, staring at nothing in particular. He was not a man who often examined his own actions, but even he recognized that this had not been about the money. He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. This had been about something else entirely, something he was not yet ready to name. That evening, as Elena was finishing her rounds in the East Wing, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She almost ignored it, thinking it was likely her aunt checking in, but something made her glance at the screen. It was the hospital. Her stomach twisted immediately, bracing for bad news. "Miss Voss," came a different voice this time, not Gareth Doyle, but a woman from the billing office, named Priya Anand. "I am calling to let you know that your brother's account has been fully reviewed and corrected. The outstanding balance has been cleared, and going forward, his treatment will continue, without any additional charges beyond his standard insurance coverage. I am very sorry for any distress the previous billing errors may have caused you and your family." Elena stood frozen in the hallway, the phone pressed to her ear, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? The balance is cleared?" "Completely cleared, Miss Voss. Your brother's treatment will continue uninterrupted. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Elena could not speak for a moment. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time, they were entirely different from the tears of the night before. She thanked the woman on the phone repeatedly, her voice thick with disbelief and relief. And when the call ended, she stood alone in the hallway, pressing her hand over her mouth, trying to understand how such a thing could have happened. She had not paid anything. She had not spoken to anyone new. The account had simply, impossibly, been made right. She thought of 100 explanations. A billing error finally caught and fixed on its own. Some charity program she had not known existed. She did not, for even a moment, imagine that the man she worked for, the man she had feared discovering her tears the night before, might be the reason her brother's treatment was safe. She finished her shift in a daze of quiet gratitude, unaware that somewhere in the house, behind a closed office door, Dante Moretti was staring out his window with an expression none of his men had ever seen on his face before, something that looked almost, though not quite, like peace. Neither of them knew yet how much that single overheard phone call would change everything that came next. The following morning, Elena arrived at the estate earlier than usual, her mind lighter than it had been in months. She hummed softly to herself as she gathered her cleaning supplies, and for the first time since she had taken this job, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Margaret noticed the change immediately. "You seem happy today," Margaret said, handing Elena her list of duties for the morning. "I got good news about my brother," Elena said carefully, not wanting to say too much. "His hospital bill was resolved. I don't fully understand how, but I am not going to question it." Margaret's eyes flickered with something Elena could not quite read, a brief, considering look that passed as quickly as it appeared. "That is good to hear," Margaret said simply, and moved on to the next assignment, though Elena noticed she glanced toward the hallway leading to Dante's office, just a moment longer than necessary. Elena did not think much of it at the time. She had work to do, and for the first time in weeks, her chest did not feel like it was being crushed under an invisible weight. She moved through her morning duties with renewed energy, dusting the tall shelves of the library, polishing the brass fixtures in the main hallway, humming quietly under her breath. She did not know that Dante had specifically requested her assignment be adjusted that day, a subtle change that placed her cleaning duties closer to his office than they had been before. She did not know that, from behind his desk, he found himself glancing toward the door more often than he cared to admit, listening for the light, quick sound of her footsteps in the hallway, the small hum of a tune she did not realize she was singing. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself he was simply making sure the situation with the hospital had been fully resolved, that there were no loose ends. But somewhere beneath that explanation, he knew it was not entirely true. He had spent years building walls around himself, walls that kept everyone at a careful distance, walls that had made him powerful, precisely because nothing could reach him, nothing could be used against him. And in the space of one overheard phone call, one crack had appeared in those walls, small but undeniable. Neither of them spoke of it, not that day, and not for several days after, but something had shifted in the house, something quiet and unspoken, a thread stretched taut between two people who had never exchanged more than a few polite words, and both of them could feel it, even if neither was ready to name it yet. Elena visited Milo that weekend, taking the long bus ride to Fairview Medical Center, with a lightness in her step she had not felt in a very long time. She found him sitting up in his hospital bed, looking better than he had in weeks. Color returned to his cheeks, a tired but genuine smile on his face when he saw her walk in. "They told me the bill got fixed," Milo said as she settled into the chair beside his bed. "Some mistake in the billing office, they said. I didn't think that kind of thing actually happened." "Neither did I," Elena admitted, taking his hand. "But I'm not going to question good luck when it finally decides to visit us." Milo studied her face for a moment, the same way he always seemed to know when something was on her mind. "You look happy," he said, "really happy, not just because of the bill." Elena laughed softly and shook her head, though she could not fully explain, even to herself, why a strange warmth had settled in her chest whenever she thought of the tall, quiet, feared man she worked for, a man who had never once smiled at her, never once spoken to her beyond a passing nod, yet somehow felt, in some way she could not name, connected to the sudden turn of fortune in her family's favor. She pushed the thought aside quickly, telling herself it was foolish, that a man like Dante Moretti had no reason to concern himself with a household maid's personal troubles, that the resolved bill was simply, as the hospital claimed, an administrative correction. But some quiet, persistent part of her mind refused to fully believe it, and that same part of her mind would not let the question rest for long. Back at the estate, as the days passed, Elena began to notice small things she had never paid attention to before. The way Dante's eyes would occasionally linger on her when she passed through a room, quickly looking away before she could catch him. The way Margaret seemed to give her lighter duties on days when she looked particularly tired, almost as though someone had instructed her to do so. The way, once, she found an envelope on her small desk in the staff quarters containing exactly enough money to cover an entire month of Milo's medication, with no note, no explanation, and no one in the household willing to admit they had left it there. She began to suspect the truth long before she was ready to confront it, and the closer that truth crept toward the surface, the more she found herself thinking about the man behind the office door, the man whose temper, she would soon learn, burned far hotter and far more protectively than anyone in that house had ever imagined possible. Elena stood in the small pantry off the kitchen, holding the plain white envelope in her hands, staring at it as though it might explain itself if she looked long enough. Inside were bills, more money than she earned in 3 weeks of work, and no note, no name, nothing to say where it had come from. She had asked Margaret directly if she knew anything about it, and Margaret had only pressed her lips together and said the money must have been left by someone who cared about her, before turning back to her work without another word. That evening, Elena made a decision. She could not simply accept mysterious envelopes and resolved hospital bills without understanding why they were happening. Her pride would not allow it, and neither would her sense of caution. If someone in this house was helping her family, she needed to know who, and she needed to know why, because kindness without explanation made her nervous in a way that debt never had. She waited until most of the staff had finished their evening duties, and the house had grown quiet, the kind of quiet that settled over the estate once the last lamps were dimmed and the last footsteps faded from the halls. She knew where his office was. She had passed it 100 times, always with her eyes down, always moving quickly. Tonight, for the first time, she walked toward it deliberately, her heart pounding with every step. The door was closed, but a thin line of light glowed beneath it, meaning he was still inside. She raised her hand to knock, hesitated, lowered it, then raised it again, and knocked 3 times before she could change her mind. "Come in." His voice was low and even, giving nothing away. Elena pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside, finding Dante seated behind a large wooden desk, a glass of dark liquid untouched beside a stack of papers. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment neither of them said anything, the silence stretching long enough that Elena almost lost her nerve entirely. "Mr. Moretti," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm sorry to disturb you. I wanted to ask you something." He set down his pen and leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Go ahead." Elena swallowed hard. "My brother's hospital bill was cleared last week. Completely cleared, with no explanation. And today, I found an envelope of money on my desk, also with no explanation. I don't want to assume anything, but I need to ask. Do you know anything about either of those things?" For a long moment, Dante said nothing. He studied her the way he studied everything, carefully, patiently, searching for whatever truth lay beneath the surface. Elena forced herself to hold his gaze, refusing to look away first, though every instinct in her body told her to apologize and retreat before she had overstepped some invisible line. "Sit down," he said finally, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Elena hesitated, then obeyed, perching on the edge of the seat, as though ready to bolt at any moment. "I heard you," Dante said, his voice quieter now, without the flat authority he usually carried. "The night you were on the phone in the hallway, my door was open. I did not intend to listen, but I could not help it." Elena felt her face flush with heat, the memory of that night rushing back all at once, the humiliation of being overheard crying and pleading, of being caught so completely unguarded. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't know the door was open. I would never have." "You have nothing to apologize for," Dante interrupted, his tone sharper than he intended, though not unkind. He softened it immediately. "What I heard troubled me. Not because you were upset, but because of what was being done to your brother. I looked into the matter. What I found was worse than I expected. The hospital's billing department had been deliberately overcharging families who could least afford it, families who had no way of fighting back. Your brother's account was one of many." Elena's mind spun, trying to piece together everything he was telling her. So the bill wasn't a mistake at all. It was fixed because you made it be fixed. "Yes," Dante said simply, no pride in his voice, no expectation of gratitude, just a plain statement of fact. "And the money in the envelope?" "Also from me," he admitted. "I did not want your brother's care to be interrupted by any further financial trouble while the situation was fully resolved. It seemed the least I could do." Elena sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the image of the cold, feared man she had heard whispered about among the staff with the person sitting across from her now, a person who had apparently gone to considerable lengths to fix a stranger's family crisis, without ever expecting to be thanked for it. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why would you do any of this for me? I'm just someone who cleans your house. You barely know me." Dante was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tightening slightly, as though he were choosing his next words with great care. "I have spent a long time," he said slowly, "surrounded by people who want things from me, who calculate every interaction, who never show me anything real. The night I heard you crying in that hallway, it was the first honest thing I had encountered in this house, in longer than I care to admit. I could not simply ignore it once I knew the truth of what was happening to your brother. That is all this was, nothing more." Elena studied him carefully, searching his face for some sign that he was exaggerating or being polite for the sake of politeness, but she found none. He meant every word, plainly and without performance. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know how I will ever repay you for what you've done." "You do not need to repay anything," Dante said firmly. "This was never a transaction. Please do not think of it that way." Elena nodded, though her mind was still racing with questions she did not know how to ask. She rose from her chair slowly, unsure of what else to say, feeling as though the conversation had shifted something fundamental in the careful, invisible role she had always played in this house. "I should let you get back to your work," she said. "Thank you again, Mr. Moretti. Truly." "Dante," he said suddenly, before she reached the door. She turned back, surprised. "Excuse me?" "You may call me Dante," he said, "at least when we are speaking like this. Not in front of the staff, if you would rather not, but privately, there is no need for such formality." Elena felt an unexpected warmth rise in her chest at the small, quiet offer, and she nodded before slipping out of the office and closing the door softly behind her. She walked back to the staff quarters in a daze, her mind turning over the conversation again and again, trying to understand how a man with such a fearsome reputation could also be capable of such quiet, unexpected generosity. Over the following weeks, something in the house began to shift, slowly and carefully, like ice thawing after a long winter. Elena still performed her duties as she always had, still moved quietly through the halls, still kept her interactions with the other staff, professional and brief. But her interactions with Dante changed in small, undeniable ways. He began greeting her by name in the mornings, something he had never done with any member of the household staff before. He would occasionally ask, in passing, how her brother was doing, his tone carefully casual, but his attention entirely genuine. Margaret noticed the shift almost immediately, her sharp eyes catching every small change in the household's rhythm. She said nothing directly to Elena about it, though once, while the two of them were folding linens together in the laundry room, she paused and said quietly, "Be careful, Elena. Men like Mr. Moretti do not open themselves easily. If he has opened himself to you, even a little, that is not something to take lightly." "I'm not taking anything lightly," Elena said, though she felt a flush of embarrassment at how transparent her feelings must have become. "He's been kind to me, that's all. I'm grateful, nothing more." Margaret gave her a long, considering look, but said nothing further, returning to her folding with the same brisk efficiency she brought to everything. Elena told herself the same thing Margaret had, that gratitude and nothing more was the appropriate response to Dante's kindness, but the truth, if she was honest with herself in the quiet hours before sleep, was more complicated than that. She found herself thinking of him more often than she should, replaying small moments from their brief exchanges, wondering what it might be like to know him beyond the careful, guarded version of himself he showed to the rest of the world. She visited Milo again that weekend, finding him in noticeably better spirits, his treatment progressing well, now that the financial pressure had been lifted entirely from their shoulders. He studied her closely as she sat beside his bed, the same perceptive look he always gave her when something was different. "You've been smiling a lot more lately," Milo observed, setting down the book he had been reading. "More than just relief about the bill being fixed. What's going on?" Elena hesitated, unsure how much to share. "There's a man I work for," she said carefully. "He's the one who fixed the hospital bill. He's not what I expected him to be, based on everything people say about him." Milo's eyebrows rose with interest. "And what exactly do people say about him?" "That he's dangerous, powerful, not someone to cross," Elena admitted. "But he's also been kind to me, in ways I don't fully understand. I don't know what to make of it." Sounds complicated, Milo said, though there was no judgment in his voice, only genuine curiosity. Just be careful, Elena. Whatever this is, be careful. Elena promised she would be, though the promise felt harder to keep with each passing day, as the quiet, unspoken connection between her and Dante continued to grow, slowly and carefully, like something neither of them had planned but neither seemed willing to stop. What neither of them knew yet, as those weeks passed in quiet, careful moments of unexpected connection, was that their growing bond had not gone unnoticed beyond the walls of the estate. Word traveled quickly in the circles Dante moved through, and not everyone who noticed the change in him viewed it favorably. Among his own associates, some began to whisper about the shift in his temperament, the way his guarded, calculating nature seemed, in small but noticeable ways, to be softening. And beyond his own organization, in the offices of a rival family that had long sought any advantage over Dante Moretti, those whispers reached ears that were more than willing to use them. Victor Callahan, head of a rival organization that had clashed with Dante's family for years over territory and influence, received the information from one of his informants with quiet interest. A household maid, the informant reported, someone Dante Moretti had taken a personal interest in, someone he had gone out of his way to protect. Victor listened carefully, turning the information over in his mind, with the calculating patience of a man who had spent decades looking for weaknesses in his enemies. Everyone has something they cannot afford to lose, Victor said to his second-in-command, a sharp, cold man named Dominic Reyes, after hearing the full report. For years, I have searched for what that might be for Dante Moretti. It seems, at last, we may have found it. Dominic studied his employer carefully. You want to use the girl against him. I want to understand exactly what she means to him first, Victor said. And then, if she means as much as I suspect, yes, I want to use her, carefully, and at exactly the right moment. Neither Elena nor Dante had any idea, as the weeks continued to pass in quiet, growing warmth between them, that somewhere across the city, a dangerous man had already begun watching them closely, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to turn their fragile, unexpected connection into a weapon aimed directly at the heart of everything Dante had built. Elena's days settled into a new rhythm, one that felt lighter than anything she had known since her parents passed away. She still worked hard, still moved through her duties with the same quiet efficiency, but now there was warmth woven through her days that had not existed before. Small conversations with Dante in passing, a shared cup of coffee once, when he found her finishing a late shift and insisted she sit for a few minutes before heading up to bed. Questions about her life, her hopes, her brother, asked with genuine curiosity rather than idle politeness. She began to see sides of him the rest of the household never witnessed. The way his expression softened, almost imperceptibly, when he spoke of his own younger sister, a woman he mentioned only once, in a quiet moment, before changing the subject entirely. The careful, deliberate way he treated the people who worked for him, despite the fearsome reputation that preceded him everywhere he went. The quiet loneliness she began to sense beneath his controlled exterior, a loneliness she recognized because she carried a version of it herself. One evening, as autumn settled over the city and the estate's gardens turned gold and crimson, Dante found Elena sitting alone on the back terrace, watching the sunset with a cup of tea cooling forgotten beside her. "May I join you?" he asked, an unusual question from a man who rarely asked permission for anything within his own home. Elena nodded, surprised but pleased, and he settled into the chair beside her, both of them quiet for a long moment, as the sky deepened into shades of orange and purple. "You seem thoughtful tonight," Dante observed. "I was thinking about my parents," Elena admitted. "They would have liked evenings like this. Quiet, nothing dramatic happening, just watching the sky change color." "Tell me about them," Dante said, and there was something in his voice, a gentleness she had not expected from a man of his reputation, that made her feel safe enough to share more than she usually allowed herself to. She told him about her mother's laugh, loud and unrestrained, the kind that filled entire rooms. She told him about her father's quiet steadiness, the way he had always known exactly what to say when she was frightened or upset. She told him about the accident, the sudden, senseless loss that had reshaped her entire life within a single afternoon, leaving her the sole guardian of a younger brother who still had so much growing left to do. Dante listened without interrupting, without offering the empty comfort that so many people reached for when faced with grief they did not know how to address. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I lost my own parents young as well," he said finally. "Different circumstances, but the same result. A childhood cut short, responsibilities placed on shoulders too young to carry them easily. I understand more of what you have experienced than you might expect." Elena turned to look at him fully, seeing, for perhaps the first time, past the careful walls he kept around himself, glimpsing the person beneath the reputation, someone who had also known loss and had built an entire fortress of control around himself, simply to survive it. "Thank you for telling me that," she said softly. "Thank you for asking," he replied, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything further, simply sitting together in comfortable silence as the last light of the sunset faded from the sky, unaware of how carefully they were both being watched from beyond the estate's tall iron gates. Dominic Reyes moved through the city with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent years learning how to disappear into crowds while still watching everything around him. Victor Callahan had given him a simple assignment: learn everything possible about the young woman who had captured Dante Moretti's attention, and learn it without being noticed by anyone connected to the Moretti household. It took less than 2 weeks for Dominic to compile a thorough picture of Elena Voss. Her background was unremarkable in every way that mattered to men like Victor, a young woman with no family connections of consequence, no history that suggested anything other than an ordinary life interrupted by tragedy and financial hardship. But that ordinariness was exactly what made her valuable. She had nothing to protect her, no resources of her own, no allies beyond a sick younger brother who depended entirely on her. She was, in every sense that mattered to Victor Callahan, an easy target. "She visits her brother every weekend at Fairview Medical Center," Dominic reported to Victor, laying out a folder of information across the older man's desk. "She has no other family in the city. Her routine is simple and predictable. She takes the same bus, at the same time, every week." Victor studied the folder carefully, his expression thoughtful. "And Moretti's feelings for her? How deep do they run?" "Deep enough that his own men have noticed the change in him," Dominic said. "He has broken from routines he has followed for years. He spends more time at the estate than his business typically allows. He has been seen with her, in ways that suggest more than simple employer and employee." Victor leaned back in his chair, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Then we have exactly what we need. Not to harm her, not yet. Simply to make Dante Moretti understand precisely how vulnerable he has allowed himself to become." Meanwhile, at the estate, Elena's growing closeness with Dante continued to deepen, though both of them remained careful, aware of the delicate nature of what was forming between them. Neither spoke openly of feelings, though the warmth in their conversations, the small moments of shared understanding, made the truth increasingly difficult to ignore. One afternoon, as Elena finished her duties in the library, Nico Bellamy approached her with an unusually serious expression on his face. "Miss Voss," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" Elena nodded, setting down her cleaning supplies, curious and slightly nervous about what Dante's most trusted advisor might want to discuss with her. "I have worked alongside Mr. Moretti for a decade," Nico said carefully. "In that time, I have never seen him behave the way he has since he began paying attention to you. I do not say this to frighten you, but I think you should understand the full weight of what that means, both for him and for yourself." "I don't fully understand what you're trying to tell me," Elena admitted. "I am telling you that his world is dangerous," Nico said plainly. "The people he deals with, the rivals who have opposed him for years, they do not hesitate to use whatever weaknesses they find against him. If they learn how much he cares for you, and I suspect some of them already have, you may find yourself in a position of danger you never anticipated when you took this job." Elena felt a chill settle over her despite the warm afternoon sunlight streaming through the library windows. "Are you saying I should leave? That I should stop working here?" "I am saying you should be careful," Nico said, "and that you should understand what you may be walking into, if this connection between you and Mr. Moretti continues to grow." I tell you this not as a warning to frighten you away, but because I believe you deserve to make your choices with full knowledge of the risks involved." Elena thanked him for his honesty, though his words lingered with her for the rest of the day, a quiet unease settling beneath the warmth she had grown accustomed to feeling whenever she thought of Dante. She had not fully considered, until now, how dangerous his world truly was, how the quiet, careful kindness he showed her existed alongside a life built on power, rivalry, and constant threat. That evening, she found Dante in his office, later than usual, poring over papers with a furrowed brow that suggested troubling news. She hesitated at the door, uncertain whether to interrupt, but he looked up and gestured her inside before she could decide. "You look concerned," Elena observed, taking the seat across from his desk. "Business matters," Dante said, though something in his tone suggested there was more to it than he was willing to share immediately. "Nothing you need to worry yourself with." "Nico spoke with me today," Elena said carefully, watching his expression shift slightly at the mention of his advisor's name. "He told me I should understand the risks of whatever this is, between us. He said your rivals might try to use me against you, if they learned how much you cared." Dante's jaw tightened, a flash of something sharp and protective crossing his features, before he carefully smoothed it away. "Nico should not have frightened you with such talk." "He didn't frighten me," Elena said, though her voice trembled slightly, betraying the truth of her words. "He gave me honesty, which I appreciate more than you might think. But I need to know, Dante, is this true? Am I in danger because of what's growing between us?" Dante was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he set down his pen and met her eyes directly. "The world I live in is not gentle," he said. "I have enemies who have spent years looking for any weakness they could exploit. Until now, I have given them nothing to use, because I allowed myself to care about very little beyond my own organization. That has changed, and I would be lying if I told you there was no risk in that change." "Then why continue?" Elena asked, though the question felt strange even as she spoke it, because some part of her already knew she did not truly want him to answer, that they should stop. "Because some things," Dante said quietly, "are worth the risk, even in a life like mine. I have thought carefully about what it means to let you matter to me, Elena. I do not make that choice lightly, and I do not intend to let anyone use it against either of us." Elena felt her chest tighten with a complicated mixture of fear and warmth, uncertain how to fully process the weight of what he was telling her. "I don't know how to protect myself from a world I don't understand," she admitted. "You do not need to protect yourself," Dante said firmly. "That is my responsibility, and I take it seriously. I will ensure nothing happens to you or to your brother. You have my word." His words offered some comfort, though the uneasy feeling Nico's warning had planted in her chest did not fully disappear. She left his office that evening with more questions than answers, aware for the first time of just how complicated and dangerous the world surrounding Dante Moretti truly was. 2 days later, everything shifted with sudden, violent clarity. Elena had taken her usual bus to visit Milo at the hospital, following the same routine she had kept for months. She sat near the window, watching the city pass by, her mind drifting between thoughts of her brother's improving health and the complicated feelings she carried for the man who had made that improvement possible. She did not notice the black sedan that had followed the bus for the past 20 minutes, keeping careful distance, its driver watching her every movement with cold, professional patience. When she stepped off the bus near the hospital, a man approached her on the sidewalk, his expression polite and unremarkable, the kind of face that blended easily into any crowd. "Miss Voss," he said pleasantly, "I wonder if I might have a brief word with you." Elena hesitated, some instinct warning her that something about the encounter felt wrong, though she could not immediately place why. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "No," the man said, his smile never wavering. "But I know quite a lot about you. Your brother Milo is doing well, I understand. Room 412, if I recall correctly. It would be a shame if his recovery were interrupted again, the way it nearly was before Mr. Moretti intervened on your behalf." Elena's blood ran cold. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I simply want you to deliver a message," the man said calmly. "Tell Mr. Moretti that Victor Callahan sends his regards. and that he understands, now, exactly what Mr. Moretti stands to lose if he does not reconsider certain business arrangements between their two organizations. Tell him the girl he has grown so fond of is not as protected as he believes her to be. Before Elena could respond, the man turned and walked calmly toward the black sedan waiting at the curb, disappearing into the vehicle before she could gather her thoughts enough to call for help or note the license plate. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, her heart pounding, terror and confusion warring inside her chest as she tried to process what had just happened. She did not visit Milo that day, at least not immediately. Instead, with shaking hands, she called Dante, her voice breaking as she recounted the encounter word for word, unable to fully steady herself, even as she tried to remain calm for his sake. Dante's response was immediate and absolute. Within minutes of ending the call, he had summoned Nico and a team of his most trusted men, dispatching them to the hospital to ensure Milo's safety, while arranging for a car to bring Elena directly to the estate, rather than allowing her to return alone. By the time Elena arrived at the estate, shaken and pale, Dante was waiting for her at the entrance, his expression a carefully controlled mask that nonetheless could not fully hide the fury simmering beneath the surface. He crossed the distance between them quickly, taking her hands in his own, his eyes searching her face for any sign of harm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. "No," Elena said, though her voice trembled, "just frightened. Dante, he knew everything. Milo's room number, everything about what you did for us. He said his name was Victor Callahan." Dante's expression darkened at the name, a cold, dangerous fury settling into his features that Elena had never witnessed before, a glimpse of the reputation that had followed him for so long, finally made visible. "Victor Callahan," he repeated quietly, almost to himself. "I should have known he would find a way to reach you." "Who is he?" Elena asked. "What does he want?" "An old rival," Dante said. "Someone who has spent years trying to find any weakness he could use against my organization. It seems he has finally found one he believes will work." His jaw tightened as he looked at her, something fierce and protective burning in his eyes. "He has made a serious mistake by involving you in this. I will not allow him to threaten you or your brother without consequence." Elena searched his face, seeing for the first time the full weight of the temper Margaret had once warned her about, a temper that had, until now, remained carefully hidden beneath layers of discipline and control. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "Whatever is necessary to ensure your safety," Dante said, his voice low and absolute. "This ends now, Elena. I promise you that." That evening, Dante called an emergency meeting with his most trusted men, his fury barely contained as he laid out the situation and the steps they would take to address Victor Callahan's direct threat against someone under his protection. Nico watched his employer carefully throughout the meeting, recognizing a level of controlled rage he had rarely witnessed in the decade he had worked alongside him. "This is different from our usual conflicts with Callahan's organization," Nico said carefully, once the other men had been dismissed to begin their assigned tasks. "He has crossed a line by directly approaching Miss Voss. This will require a careful response, not simply an aggressive one." "I am aware of that," Dante said, his voice tight with restrained fury. "But make no mistake, Nico. Careful does not mean gentle. Victor Callahan will understand, very clearly, that threatening someone I care about carries consequences he will not enjoy facing." Nico nodded slowly, understanding the depth of his employer's resolve. "What would you like me to do first?" "Increase security around Elena and her brother immediately," Dante said. "Round-the-clock protection, no exceptions. And find out everything you can about Callahan's current operations, every business dealing, every vulnerability he has. If he wants to test how far I am willing to go to protect what matters to me, I intend to show him exactly how far that is." As Nico left to begin carrying out his instructions, Dante remained alone in his office, staring out at the darkened gardens beyond his window, his mind consumed with a fierce, protective resolve, unlike anything he had felt in years. He had built his entire life around control, around never allowing anger to dictate his choices. But the thought of Elena standing frightened on a sidewalk, threatened by a man determined to use her as a weapon against him, had ignited something in him he could not fully suppress. He thought of the quiet evenings they had shared on the terrace, the warmth in her voice as she spoke of her parents, the gentle strength she carried despite everything life had put her through. He thought of how effortlessly she had become important to him, more important than he had allowed anyone to become in longer than he cared to remember. And he understood, with absolute clarity, that he would do whatever was necessary to ensure Victor Callahan never had the chance to follow through on his threat. Elena, meanwhile, sat in one of the estate's guest rooms, having been convinced by Dante to stay the night rather than return to the staff quarters alone, given the uncertainty of the situation. She stared out the window at the same darkened gardens, her mind racing with fear for her brother's safety and a fierce, unexpected gratitude for the lengths Dante was willing to go to protect them both. She did not yet know the full extent of what was coming, the confrontation that loomed on the horizon between Dante and Victor Callahan, a confrontation that would test everything both of them had built, everything they had come to mean to each other, and everything Dante had sworn to protect. Morning brought no relief from the tension that had settled over the estate. Elena woke early, having slept fitfully through the night, despite the comfort of the guest room and the knowledge that armed men now stood watch throughout the property. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, finding the house already alive with quiet, purposeful activity, men moving through the halls with the focused efficiency of soldiers preparing for something significant. She found Dante in his office, having clearly not slept at all, his desk covered with maps, papers, and photographs she did not recognize. He looked up when she entered, his expression softening slightly despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Not well," Elena admitted, taking the seat across from him. "I keep thinking about Milo. Is he safe?" "Completely safe," Dante assured her. "I have men stationed at the hospital around the clock. Nothing will happen to him." Elena studied the papers scattered across his desk, recognizing enough to understand he had been working through the night to formulate some kind of response to Victor Callahan's threat. "What are you planning to do?" Dante hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share with her. "There are options," he said carefully, "some more direct than others. I intend to make Victor understand, beyond any doubt, that threatening you was a mistake he will not repeat." "Without violence," Elena said, though it came out more as a plea than a statement, her eyes searching his face for reassurance she was not entirely certain he could give. Dante's jaw tightened. "I cannot promise you the kind of world I live in operates entirely without conflict, Elena, but I can promise you that whatever steps I take, I will take them carefully, and I will do everything in my power to ensure this is resolved without unnecessary harm to anyone, including Victor's own people." Elena nodded slowly, understanding that this was likely the most reassurance she could reasonably expect given the circumstances. "What can I do to help?" "Stay here, where I know you are safe," Dante said firmly. "That is the most important thing you can do right now." Over the following days, Dante worked tirelessly alongside Nico and his most trusted associates, gathering information about Victor Callahan's operations, searching for a resolution that would neutralize the threat without escalating into the kind of open conflict that could put countless people at risk. Elena remained at the estate throughout this time, visiting Milo only under heavy protection, her days filled with a strange, uneasy waiting that tested her patience and her nerves in equal measure. She spent much of her time with Margaret, who had grown noticeably more protective of her since the incident, and with Nico, who despite his earlier warning about the dangers of her connection to Dante, had grown genuinely fond of her over the following days, impressed by her quiet resilience in the face of danger she had never asked for. "He has not stopped working since the day you told him about Victor's approach," Nico told her one afternoon, as they sat together in the library, while Elena tried, without much success, to distract herself with a book. "I have never seen him this focused, or this determined, on any matter in all the years I have worked alongside him." "I worry about what it's costing him," Elena admitted. "He barely sleeps. He barely eats. I feel responsible for putting him through all of this." "You are not responsible for Victor Callahan's actions," Nico said firmly. "You did nothing wrong, Elena. Victor made his choice to threaten you, and Dante is simply responding to protect what matters to him. That is not a burden you should carry." Elena appreciated his words, though the guilt lingered regardless, a persistent weight she could not fully set aside no matter how many times she reminded herself of the truth in what Nico had said. Meanwhile, Victor Callahan grew increasingly impatient as days passed without any direct response from Dante Moretti. He had expected fear, perhaps even a willingness to negotiate favorable business terms in exchange for Elena's continued safety. Instead, he received only silence, a silence that unnerved him more than any direct threat might have. "He is planning something," Victor said to Dominic one evening, pacing his office with barely restrained frustration. "This silence is not surrender, it is preparation." "Perhaps we should press further," Dominic suggested. "Make our position clearer, before he has the chance to organize a full response." Victor considered this for a long moment, before nodding slowly. "Arrange another encounter with the girl. Something more direct this time. I want Moretti to understand precisely how vulnerable she remains, regardless of whatever protection he believes he has arranged." Dominic nodded and left to carry out his instructions, unaware that Dante's men had already identified several of Victor's associates through careful surveillance over the preceding days, gathering exactly the kind of information Dante needed to move against Victor's organization with precision rather than blind aggression. 3 days after the initial encounter, as Elena sat with Milo during a rare, heavily guarded visit to the hospital, a nurse she did not recognize entered the room to check his vitals, her manner slightly too rehearsed, her attention lingering a beat too long on Elena rather than on her patient. Elena's instincts, sharpened by the events of the previous days, immediately recognized something was wrong. "I don't believe we've met," Elena said carefully, watching the woman's hands as she adjusted the monitoring equipment beside Milo's bed. "Are you new to this floor?" The woman's expression flickered, just slightly, before she offered a practiced smile. "Just covering for a colleague today," she said smoothly, though her eyes darted briefly toward the door. Checking, Elena realized with rising alarm, for the guards stationed just outside. Elena did not hesitate. She pressed the small device Dante had given her, disguised as an ordinary pendant necklace, alerting the security team stationed nearby. Within seconds, 2 of Dante's men entered the room, their presence immediate and commanding, and the woman's practiced calm shattered entirely as she attempted, unsuccessfully, to explain her presence. She was quickly escorted from the hospital for questioning, and it did not take long for Nico's team to confirm what Elena had already suspected. The woman had no legitimate connection to the hospital staff whatsoever, having gained access through forged credentials, sent specifically by Victor Callahan's organization to gather further information, or perhaps to attempt something considerably more dangerous had she not been caught in time. When Dante received word of the incident, something in him finally broke free from the careful restraint he had maintained throughout the preceding days. He arrived at the hospital within the hour, his expression colder and more dangerous than Elena had ever witnessed, a controlled fury radiating from him that silenced every person in his path. "Are you certain you are both unharmed?" he asked, his voice tight as he examined Elena and then Milo, who watched the exchange with wide, uncertain eyes, clearly recognizing that whatever was happening extended far beyond simple hospital security concerns. "We're fine," Elena assured him, though her hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline of the encounter finally began to fade. "But Dante," she was so close to Milo, "if I hadn't noticed something was wrong." "You did notice," Dante said firmly, taking her hands in his own. "You handled it exactly right. But this ends now, Elena. I have given Victor every chance to reconsider his approach through quiet means. He has made clear he has no intention of doing so." Milo, watching this exchange with growing understanding, finally spoke up. "Elena, what is going on? Who is trying to hurt me?" Elena hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal, but Dante answered before she could decide. "There is a man who wishes to harm your sister by threatening you," he said plainly, his tone gentle despite the gravity of his words. "I intend to ensure that threat is removed entirely and permanently. You have my word that neither of you will be harmed." Milo studied Dante carefully, a 16-year-old boy suddenly faced with the reality of dangers he had never anticipated, yet something in Dante's steady, absolute confidence seemed to reassure him despite the frightening circumstances. "Okay," he said quietly. "I believe you." That night, Dante called together his full network of trusted associates, laying out a plan that had been forming over the preceding days, one built not on reckless aggression, but on careful, decisive action, designed to neutralize Victor Callahan's threat entirely. Nico had uncovered significant vulnerabilities in Victor's operations during their surveillance, financial irregularities that, if exposed to the right authorities and business partners, could unravel Victor's entire organization far more effectively than any direct confrontation. "We move on multiple fronts simultaneously," Dante instructed his assembled men. "Nico's information goes to exactly the right people tomorrow morning, ensuring Victor's business partners and financial backers understand the risks of continuing to associate with him. Meanwhile, I will speak with Victor directly, ensuring he understands, without any ambiguity, that his campaign against Elena and her brother ends immediately, or he will lose everything he has built." "And if he refuses to listen?" one of his men asked. "Then he will discover exactly why so many have learned, over the years, never to test the limits of my patience," Dante said, his voice carrying a cold, absolute certainty that left no room for doubt among the men listening. The following morning, as Nico's carefully compiled information began reaching Victor Callahan's business partners, sowing exactly the kind of doubt and concern Dante had intended, Dante arrived at Victor's private office unannounced, accompanied by only Nico and two of his most trusted men, a deliberate show of confidence rather than aggressive force. Victor rose from his desk as Dante entered, his expression carefully composed despite the surprise of the unannounced visit. "Dante," he said smoothly, "I confess I did not expect you to visit personally." "I imagine there is quite a lot you did not expect, Victor," Dante replied, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge of danger beneath the surface. "Including, I suspect, several calls you have likely already received this morning from business partners, suddenly questioning their continued association with your organization." Victor's composure flickered, just slightly, though he recovered quickly. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "I think you understand precisely what I am referring to," Dante said. "You made the mistake of threatening someone under my protection, Victor. I have spent the past several days ensuring you understand the full weight of that mistake. This is merely the beginning." "You would risk open conflict between our organizations over a household maid?" Victor asked, though his tone had lost much of its earlier confidence. "I would risk considerably more than that," Dante said, his voice dropping lower, colder, carrying a fury he had kept carefully restrained throughout their entire conversation. "Elena is not simply a household maid, Victor, and you already know that, which is precisely why you targeted her in the first place. You believed you had found a weakness you could exploit. Instead, you have discovered exactly how far I am willing to go to protect what matters to me." Victor studied Dante carefully, recognizing, perhaps for the first time, the full extent of the miscalculation he had made in underestimating both Dante's resolve and his resources. "What do you want, Dante?" "I want your word, given here and now, that you will never approach Elena or her brother again, in any capacity, for any reason," Dante said. "I want you to understand that if you break that word, what I have done to your business partnerships this morning will seem like a gentle warning compared to what follows. And I want you to remember, every single day going forward, that you brought this consequence entirely upon yourself." Victor was silent for a long moment, calculating his options, recognizing that he had already lost considerable ground through Dante's swift and decisive response, ground he had no realistic path to recovering through continued conflict. "You have my word," he said finally, the admission clearly costing him considerable pride. "This ends here." "See that it does," Dante said, before turning and leaving Victor's office without another word, Nico and his men following closely behind. As they walked back to the car, Nico glanced at his employer with quiet approval. "That went better than I expected," he admitted. "Victor understands consequences," Dante said. "He simply needed a clear enough demonstration to remember them properly." Back at the estate, Elena waited anxiously for news of the confrontation, pacing the length of the library despite Margaret's gentle attempts to calm her nerves. When Dante finally returned, his expression calm despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes, Elena rushed to meet him, searching his face for any sign of what had transpired. "Is it over?" she asked immediately. "It's over," Dante confirmed, and for the first time in days, Elena felt the tight knot of fear in her chest finally begin to loosen. "Victor Callahan will not trouble you or your brother again." Elena felt tears welling in her eyes, relief washing over her so completely that her legs nearly gave way beneath her. Dante caught her gently, steadying her, and for a long moment, they simply stood together in the quiet library, the weight of the preceding days finally beginning to lift from both their shoulders. "Thank you," Elena whispered, "for everything, for protecting Milo, for protecting me, for going to such lengths when you barely knew me, only weeks ago. You have become far more important to me than barely knowing you would suggest," Dante said quietly, his hand gently cupping her face, as he looked into her eyes with an openness she had never seen from him before. "I meant what I told Victor, Elena. You are not simply someone who works in my household. You have become someone I care for deeply, more deeply than I expected to care for anyone again." Elena's heart raced at his words, at the vulnerability in his voice, so different from the guarded, controlled man the rest of the world knew him to be. "I care for you too," she admitted softly. "More than I expected to, given everything I had heard about you before I truly knew you." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, simply standing together in the quiet library, finally allowing themselves to acknowledge openly what had been growing between them for weeks. But even as relief settled over the estate, neither of them yet knew that Victor Callahan's retreat, however genuine, would not be the final test of everything they had built together, and that one last confrontation still waited on the horizon before their story could find its true resolution. The weeks that followed Victor Callahan's retreat brought a peace to the estate that Elena had never expected to experience within its walls. She continued her work, though her role within the household had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Margaret treated her with a new warmth, no longer simply a stern supervisor, but something closer to a mentor who had watched her navigate genuine danger with courage she clearly admired. Nico had become something like a trusted friend, his earlier warnings replaced by genuine support for the relationship that had blossomed between Elena and his employer. Milo continued to improve steadily, his treatment progressing well beyond what anyone had initially hoped, and Elena visited him regularly now, without the constant fear that had shadowed every visit during the height of the conflict with Victor Callahan. Dante often accompanied her on these visits, and Milo had grown genuinely fond of him, the initial wariness of a 16-year-old boy meeting his sister's powerful, intimidating partner, gradually replaced by real affection and respect. "You know," Milo said to Elena one afternoon, while Dante had stepped out to speak with his doctor about the latest treatment results, "I was terrified of him at first. Everyone talks about him like he's someone to fear." "He can be," Elena admitted. "I've seen that side of him now, the part that terrified you. But I've also seen who he is, underneath all of that fear people have of him, and I promise you, Milo, he is a good man, in every way that matters." "I believe you," Milo said, smiling. "Especially after everything he did for us. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay what he's given us, Elena. Not just the money for my treatment, but everything else. The protection. The way he treats you." Elena smiled, warmth filling her chest at her brother's words. "You don't need to repay him, Milo. He's never expected that from either of us." As the weeks turned into months, Elena's relationship with Dante deepened into something neither of them had ever expected to find, given the very different worlds they had come from. Dante gradually introduced her to more of his life beyond the careful boundaries of the estate, taking her to dinners at restaurants where the staff greeted him with a mixture of respect and quiet fear, introducing her, slowly and carefully, to the small circle of people he trusted enough to call genuine friends, rather than simply business associates. She learned more about his past during these months, about the difficult childhood that had shaped him into the careful, controlled man he had become, about the responsibilities that had been thrust upon him far too young, much like her own experience after her parents' deaths, though his circumstances had been considerably more dangerous than her own. She came to understand that the reputation surrounding him, the fear that gripped so many who spoke his name, existed alongside a man who valued loyalty, who protected those under his care fiercely, who had simply built walls around himself because the world he lived in offered little room for vulnerability. Dante, in turn, found himself changing in ways he had never anticipated when Elena first arrived at his estate as a quiet, unremarkable member of his household staff. The careful control he had maintained over every aspect of his life for so many years began to soften, not entirely, not in ways that compromised his effectiveness in running his organization, but enough that his closest associates noticed a genuine warmth in him that had been absent for as long as most of them had known him. "You are different since she arrived," Nico observed one evening, as the two of them reviewed business matters in Dante's office, months after the resolution of the conflict with Victor Callahan. "I do not say this as a criticism, I say it because I believe it has been good for you, this change. She reminded me that there is more to life than simply maintaining control over everything around me," Dante admitted, a rare moment of openness, even with his most trusted advisor. "I had forgotten, I think, what it felt like to genuinely care about someone beyond the boundaries of business and strategy." "And Milo, how do you feel about the boy?" Dante's expression softened slightly at the mention of Elena's brother. "He is a good kid, resilient, given everything he has faced. I find myself wanting to ensure his future is secure, regardless of what happens between Elena and myself." Nico studied his employer carefully, recognizing the depth of commitment in his words. "You are speaking of him as though he were already family." "Perhaps he already is," Dante said quietly, "in every way that matters." As autumn gave way to winter, Elena found herself standing once again on the estate's back terrace, watching snow begin to fall gently over the gardens that had been golden and crimson when she first sat with Dante months earlier, sharing stories of parents lost too soon. Dante joined her, as he often did now, wrapping a warm coat around her shoulders against the evening chill. "It's been quite a year," Elena said softly, watching the snow settle over the quiet gardens. "It has," Dante agreed. "Not the year either of us expected when you first arrived here, frightened and exhausted, trying desperately to remain invisible." Elena laughed softly at the memory. "I was terrified of you, you know. Everyone had told me such frightening things about you before I even met you properly." "And now?" Dante asked, a rare smile touching his lips. "Now I know the truth," Elena said, turning to face him fully. "That the man everyone fears is also the man who went to war against a dangerous rival to protect a household maid he had barely spoken to. That beneath all of that careful control is someone capable of tremendous kindness, tremendous loyalty, and tremendous love when he finally allows himself to feel it." Dante reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his expression open and vulnerable in a way that would have shocked anyone who knew him only through his fearsome reputation. "I never expected to feel any of this again, Elena. Not after everything I built my life around, after everything I convinced myself I needed to sacrifice in order to survive in this world. You changed that, simply by being honest in a hallway outside my office, on a night you believed no one was listening." "I'm glad you were listening," Elena said softly. "So am I," Dante replied, "more than I could ever properly express." He reached into his coat pocket then, retrieving a small velvet box that Elena had not noticed him carrying, and her breath caught as he opened it, to reveal a simple, elegant ring, nothing ostentatious, exactly the kind of understated elegance she had come to associate with the private, genuine version of him that so few people ever witnessed. "I know this world I live in carries risks," Dante said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability evident in his eyes. "I know there may be other Victor Callahans in the future, other dangers I cannot always predict or prevent. But I promise you, Elena, that I will spend every day ensuring you and Milo remain safe, cared for, and loved, exactly as you both deserve. If you are willing to accept that promise, and everything that comes with it, I would be deeply honored if you would agree to build a life with me." Elena's eyes filled with tears, though these tears carried none of the fear and desperation of the ones Dante had overheard through his office door so many months earlier. These tears were born entirely of joy, of gratitude, of a love she had never expected to find in a life that had handed her so much hardship, before finally offering something so unexpectedly beautiful in return. "Yes," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears. "Yes, Dante, I will build a life with you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with careful, reverent hands, and then pulled her close, holding her against him as snow continued to fall gently around them. The quiet garden transformed into something that felt, in that singular moment, like the beginning of everything good that still lay ahead for both of them. Milo, upon hearing the news during Elena's next visit, could not stop grinning, delighted at the prospect of gaining a brother-in-law who had already done so much to protect and provide for their small, resilient family. "I told you I liked him," Milo said, laughing as Elena recounted the proposal in detail. "Even when I was scared of him at first, I could tell he genuinely cared about you, about both of us." "He did," Elena agreed, smiling as she thought back over everything that had brought them to this point, from that desperate, tearful phone call outside his office door to this moment of quiet, unexpected happiness. He cared enough to risk everything, simply because he overheard one phone call and refused to look away from what he heard. Margaret, when she learned of the engagement, embraced Elena warmly, tears of genuine happiness in her own eyes. "I have worked in this house for many years," she said. "I have never seen Mr. Moretti as happy as he has become since you arrived, Elena. Whatever brought the two of you together, I am deeply grateful for it." Nico, ever practical despite his genuine affection for both Elena and his employer, simply nodded with quiet satisfaction when Dante shared the news, offering his sincere congratulations before adding, with a small smile, "I believe this may be the best business decision you have ever made, though I suspect you did not view it in those terms at all." "I did not," Dante agreed, laughing genuinely, a sound that had become considerably more common in the months since Elena's arrival. "This was never about strategy or calculation, Nico. This was simply about recognizing something real, something honest, in a world that had offered me very little of either for a very long time." As winter settled fully over the estate, transforming the gardens into a quiet, snow-covered landscape of peaceful beauty, Elena often found herself reflecting on the strange, unexpected journey that had brought her to this point. She had arrived at Dante Moretti's estate frightened, exhausted, and desperate simply to survive long enough to see her brother through his illness. She had never imagined that a single moment of vulnerability, one tearful phone call overheard through a partially open office door, would lead her to a love she had never expected to find, with a man whose fierce protectiveness had ultimately saved not only her brother's life, but transformed her entire future into something she could never have anticipated on that first difficult night. Dante, for his part, found himself grateful, in ways he rarely allowed himself to express openly, for the courage Elena had shown throughout their entire journey together, courage that had matched his own fierce determination to protect what mattered most to him. He had spent so many years building walls to protect himself from a world that offered little safety for genuine vulnerability, and in the end, it had been her honesty, her strength, and her quiet resilience that had finally shown him a different way to live, one where protecting those he loved did not require sacrificing the warmth and connection that made life truly worth living. Their wedding, when it came the following spring, was a quiet, private affair, attended only by those who had walked alongside them through the difficulties of the preceding year, Margaret and Nico, among the small circle of guests, who understood exactly how far Elena and Dante had come together, from a place of fear and uncertainty to a future built on genuine love, unwavering loyalty, and the kind of quiet, enduring strength that no rival, no threat, and no danger would ever again be able to threaten. And somewhere in the back of the garden where it had all truly begun, beneath the same trees that had witnessed their first honest conversation months earlier, Elena and Dante began their new life together, grateful for the single overheard phone call that had changed everything, and for the fierce, protective love that had grown from it, strong enough to weather any storm that still lay ahead.